My dad is a great guy. When I was little, we would go to the video store and we'd rent a VHS tape for the weekend. And on one Friday, he let me pick the movie. And bless my dad, he was patient enough to put up with me renting the movie Scooby-Doo Goes Hollywood. Now for him, I hope it was worth seeing me happy, because I love that movie and I watched it over and over and over and over again that weekend. Having rewatched it again all these years later though, I was at a loss for how meta this movie was. The film was primarily about the workings of show business and leverage between actors and movie studios, but also alluded to the flux the franchise was as a whole at that time, under the guise of a cartoon musical, of course. And I know, this sounds like a lot for Scooby-Doo's very first animated movie, and there's a lot to unravel here. So with that, let's uncover Scooby-Doo Goes Hollywood. Before we discuss the film, let's take a look at its backstory. Scooby-Doo Goes Hollywood aired on ABC on December 23, 1979, with a runtime of about 49 minutes, making this the first ever Scooby-Doo movie. If you don't count that as a film technically, it was still released on home video a few years later, before any other Scooby-Doo movie at that time, so it covers its bases to hold that crown. A majority of the original voice cast is featured here as well, with Frank Welker as Fred, Casey Keenum as Shaggy, and Don Messick as Scooby-Doo, with only Daphne and Velma being replaced. The movie starts out in the middle of Scooby and the gang solving a mystery, being chased by the crabby creature of Creepy Crag. I like the design of the monster. It still has that old school vibe of a monster that could exist in the show, but is clearly a parody of all the silly foes they faced in their adventures. The creature catapults them out of the castle, and it's revealed that they're actually on a Hollywood movie set. In this world, Scooby and the gang are actors, starring in a show about themselves. Kind of. It's not explicitly stated if they're strictly actors, or if they're reenacting their old adventures to make the show. After a particularly rough scene, Shaggy convinces Scooby that they're not being taken seriously as stars, and take too much abuse filming with monsters. Shaggy then proceeds to sing a song with Scooby about how they want to be big-time celebrities, and it's what you'd expect it to be. They're not singers, but there's so much personality behind it, it's hard not to enjoy. The thing that struck me about this film too, is there's no mystery. The entire film is about Shaggy pushing Scooby to want to be a star, and while initially Scooby wants that, as the film goes on, he secretly wants to just get back to his own show, but Shaggy won't relent. So if anything, I'd say if there's a villain in this show, it's Shaggy. The two decide to go to the president of the television network, and there's a running joke where everyone they come across, gate guards, secretaries, fans, don't know, and even hate Shaggy, and only let him through because Scooby-Doo is with him. They meet with the network president who, fun fact, was voiced by Rip Taylor, who also voiced Mr. Mick in the Cartoon Network show Whatever Happened to Robot Jones, and proceed to pitch him new shows for Scooby-Doo to star in. The first pitch is How Scooby Won the West, a short movie about Scooby and Shaggy trying to wrangle an outlaw. It's classic Scooby-Doo fare. They search for the bad guy, but Scooby gets scared and slapstick ensues. This is one of the least interesting pitches, since it's not one of the musical ones, so it's barely over 2 minutes long, and there's not much room for it to breathe or parody much of anything. It's not very new or inventive, but at worst, it's classic Scooby-Doo. This goes for the next pitch too, Levon and Scooby. Scooby and his co-star Levon are playing entrants in a roller skating competition, and it's mostly Scooby-Doo messing up roller skating. Again, we've seen this before and it's not very interesting, but the fact that they're short is a good thing in this case. The next pitch is where we start getting to the highlights. Scooby Days is a parody of Happy Days, complete with a Fonz-like character called The Groove. There's not much to the pitch, it's mostly just an excuse to get to the 50s style song, and this was always one of my favorites in the movie. Scooby and the Groove sing about how cool Scooby is, backed by Archie-like kids, and my favorite, the deep-voiced guy. It's a catchy song that's all cheese, but perfect for kids, and I still hum it in my head to this day, years after seeing the movie. Thankfully, the creative team, though, knew not to have Scooby sing too much, so he just adds a few verses, and it's a fun little tune. The pitch ends with Scooby accidentally fawn smashing the jukebox, and this parody is definitely one of the best in the movie. After leaving the network president's office, Scooby attends a fancy party to try and rub elbows with the Hollywood elite, but gets distracted by the food spread and kicked out. Meanwhile, the network president tries to get his team to get Scooby back on his own show. It's interesting how the first Scooby-Doo movie is about behind-the-scenes show business workings. I remember being a kid wanting Scooby to return to his own show, but looking at it now, I see a battle for performers growing tired of being typecast and wanting to do something different, while the studios want to keep their ratings high and actors in their lanes by whatever means necessary. And they definitely do in just a little while. During all this, we see Fred, Velma, and Daphne reminiscing about Scooby. They remember going to the pet store looking for a new dog, and Shaggy comments on how he wants a dog with character. They see puppy Scooby falling over himself, and Shaggy says he has too much character. Thankfully, Velma decides that Scooby's the dog for them. That honestly blew my mind a little bit. In every other Scooby origin story, we see Shaggy as Scooby's best friend. So to see Shaggy didn't want him, I was shocked. And that it was Velma who was Scooby's savior in this instance, maybe it's because there seems to be a bias of Velma not getting along with him in more recent versions of the gang, most blatantly in Mystery Inc. Her and Scooby are constantly butting heads. It reminds me of how in Seinfeld, as the seasons went on, Elaine and George were still friends, but they were clearly antagonistic to each other. Something about Velma loving Scooby while Shaggy wasn't too sure gave me a warm feeling for her, and really started to make me dislike Shaggy here. They recall his first birthday, and then a montage of clips from old Scooby-Doo shows play under the music of the Scooby-Doo theme song sung slowly. It's clearly done to pad out time, but when you could only occasionally catch reruns of these episodes, it probably wasn't as offensive to do back then. But clip shows, personally, always bothered me. Next, Scooby briefly parodies Superman. He works as a typist, but when danger ensues, he becomes Super Scooby. It's a short parody. A missile is headed toward the city, Scooby catches it, and it explodes in his face. Next is the Sound of Music parody. Scooby begins singing, but then trips and falls off the mountain into a cliff. I found it particularly humorous, and clearly they had one idea, and thankfully, its punchline matches its setup. They use a single cell of animation to show him falling, just getting smaller, which makes it even funnier to me for some reason. So this is one of the best parodies by a mile. Meanwhile, the gang and network president hold dog auditions to replace Scooby, with Scooby and Shaggy looking on from afar. The dogs are lousy, but they hire one just to put the pressure on Scooby to come back. Can you believe this is still an animated Scooby movie from 1979 I'm talking about? It still strikes me as odd, but I digress. Scooby and Shaggy are back in the network president's office later, showing him a film called Scooby and Cherie. First, the two do a magic act, and of course the trick goes haywire. Now the second part of this has Scooby and Cherie sing a song about how she needs some time to make her mind up about him romantically. Now this part has special significance to me. Because of this song, I had my first cartoon crush on Cherie. Something about how the character looked, how she playfully couldn't decide whether she liked Scooby or not, and her voice. For some reason, that all just clicked with me. So that's my personal revelation to you folks. And maybe I'm being biased, but I do genuinely believe this is the best song in the movie, musically and lyrically. Up next is a parody of The Love Boat. Scooby is a cruise ship captain and sets sail, but forgot to undo the ropes, so the boat rips the dock off and takes it with them, followed by Scooby-Doo appearing on a talk show saying that he's going for a new image, which causes the kids of the world, yes, the world, you can hear the kids of the world from space chanting that they want Scooby to go back to his roots. After a short Charlie's Angels parody, the president shows Scooby and Shaggy that they are stars, with a massive crowd gathering outside chanting Scooby-Doo, we need you. And they decide to go back to their regular Saturday morning cartoon series. The movie ends with Shaggy trying one last time to pitch his own pilots to the network president, and being thrown out and running back to the game. We've talked a bit about the plot being meta, but I believe its examination of real-life events goes beyond that. You have to look at where Scooby-Doo as a franchise was at that time. It's hard to imagine now since it's over 50 years old, but back in 1979, just about a decade in, Scooby-Doo had gone from cartoon powerhouse to struggling to finding its footing. At this point, there had been numerous Scooby-Doo shows, and ones where he had major appearances, but also ones that his name was attached to just to give a springboard for other shows, including the original Scooby-Doo Where Are You?, the new Scooby-Doo movies, the Scooby-Doo Show, Scooby's All-Star Laugh Olympics, and the Scooby-Doo / Dino Mutt Hour. Despite all these shows, the ratings for each subsequent Scooby show were in decline. Ironically enough, eventually raised back up by the show Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo. And assuming this movie was in production before or during that show, it was fair to wonder which direction Scooby would go in next, before ultimately settling into the Scrappy-Doo era for the next few years. Scooby-Doo Goes Hollywood holds a special place in my heart, bringing back affectionate memories of movie nights with my dad, and for me, it will always hold that spot. But for those who may not have seen it, I had to ask myself, is it required viewing? Yes and no, depending on your love for Scooby-Doo. If you're a casual viewer, I'd say it's skippable. It doesn't have a mystery, most of the shorts aren't particularly memorable. Now if you're a Scooby-Doo fanatic, or an old school Scooby fan, or want to see the gang tackle a different scenario not mystery related, but retaining the classic Scooby wackiness, or if you're going through all the classic media, I'd say then give it a watch. The fun moments definitely outweigh the less entertaining ones, which even then aren't necessarily bad, just more filler oriented, but still charm in a classic cartoon way. To end, I think Cherie sums up how I feel about this movie perfectly. I've had some time to make my mind up, and I still love you, Scooby-Doo.